Well, good morning to one and all. I have a great deal of love for you because I know what you do every day. We the willing, led by the unknowing, are do the impossible for the ungrateful. We've done so much for so long with so little that we're now qualified to do anything with nothing. I think you've heard those words before. They're credited to Mother Teresa. And in those words, I sense a little bit of compassion stress, maybe. Something I worry about with our chaplains as you serve so diligently to bless the lives of those you serve, both in uniform and those family members who sacrifice so greatly on behalf of their family members. Today, Frank asked if I would share a little bit of my own personal experience regarding suicide, something I do not enjoy, something I don't like to talk about. But for Frank, I'd do just about anything. And so today I'm going to take just a moment and talk to you about my experience as a family member and a survivor of suicide. After many years of struggling with demons that my wife and I did not understand, our amazing son Jordan took his life before our eyes. We were far away on the other side of the room and couldn't reach him before that act had occurred. He was just 18 years old. As I watched the life leave my son's body, I remember the world seemed to close in on me. I lost my peripheral vision at the time. My awareness narrowed. And it was as if I were looking through a straw. Very hard to explain. My soul cried out in agony. I felt an immediate wave of crushing emotional and spiritual pain like nothing I have ever experienced before or since. It was so severe that I felt as if it would just simply sweep me away into oblivion. And I felt that I had died at that same moment, never to live again. I remember thinking to myself that the world as I knew it had ended. And I also remember thinking that I had a choice to make. It's kind of interesting that thought came to me in that moment of chaos. It came very forcefully. I had a choice to make. I could curse God and his cruelty, or I could say, what can I learn from this personal tragedy, and how can I use it to do something good? And at the time, I had no idea what that something good might be. I also remember going into the combat mode, we call it, very quickly after the event, as the sirens began. And as people began coming into my home, I armored up, as it were, and that's what we do. Those of us that face crisis, we know how to do that very well. I knew that my wife and my two children would need me desperately, more than ever before at this time, so I knew that I had to be strong. And I began to unknowingly take myself to a place where I could not feel, so that I could handle the stress of the initial shock and the burial of my son. Unfortunately, it took me to a place that took me years to come back from, and I'll talk about that in just a sec. Now, a couple of experiences that happened after the suicide. Suicides are strange because they are catastrophic in a way that is hard to describe to those who are left behind. And as ministers, and as those who try to lift and build and strengthen, it's difficult to know what to say. It's difficult to know what to do. And so, as a result, sometimes people do and say things that are not helpful. And I'll share just a few of those with you. Shortly after the suicide and burial, as I walked through the grocery store one night, I went there for my wife to get some things we needed. A close church friend of mine came around the corner with a shopping cart, and he came about 20 feet from me. Our eyes met, and I just saw a great deal of fear and confusion in his face, and he turned around and ran the other way without saying a word. My wife and I lost our names that day. We were no longer Jeff and Sharon. We were those people whose son killed himself in their home. Stories of the last moments between my wife and my son spread through the community and the neighborhood and the church family, and they bore little resemblance to the truth. I often wondered where they came from. At the time of my son's death, I was in the bishopric, and my own bishop stood up in his funeral and condemned the act as self-murder. Thankfully, a very wise stake president closed the meeting with the story of our noble pioneer families, many of whom on the way to Utah had lost multiple children and had to bury them in banks of snow and places because of the hard ground, cover them up, knowing that their bodies would be disturbed by animals and wolves and so forth. But he said that it's a documented fact that many of those parents who in their grief could go on no further, simply lay down in the bank of snow and allow themselves to die of exposure. We cannot judge them in their grief, just like we cannot judge those who have taken their lives. Jesus Christ will be their judge. At the time, my wife was serving in the Relief Society presidency, and a few weeks after we buried our son, she was attending a ward council meeting. And another member of the bishopric, a very young guy, about 32 years old, gave a thought on the atonement. And following his thought, he singled my wife out and said, Sister Burton, I know you believe in the atonement. Haven't you gotten over the death of your son yet? And he reminded her to exercise faith. And though I know he wasn't trying to be unkind, his comments at the time were insensitive. Unless you've personally borne a child, raised them through sickness and health, raised them through difficulty and infancy into adulthood, and then lost them so senselessly and tragically, you can't possibly understand what is in a mother's heart and what's going through her mind. So less than a year after my son's death, my best friend, my father, who I was very close to, died fairly unexpectedly, much sooner than any of us thought. And then I received deployment orders and had to be gone within 8 days to lead a sapper battalion in the initial stages of Operation Iraqi Freedom 1. I hardened up my armor again. I launched off into a 16-month deployment with a furious commitment to taking care of my men. That was first and foremost in my mind. On the outside, I was the epitome of a warrior, and you didn't see any cracks in my armor. But on the inside, I was a seething mass of jello, and I slipped into a deeper and a darker place of personal darkness. I prayed unceasingly and for the ministering of angels, and we had it. And I know for a fact, without doubt, that we were protected on that deployment. We were the bomb hunters. We were the ones out clearing the way, and we had zero armor protection at the time, Vietnam-era flak vests, and simply took the doors off of our Humvees so that we could get out of them quickly if we needed to. There's no reason in the world that all of those men returned. Absolutely zero, because people were dying around us every day. But I felt the strength of God, and I felt pure knowledge come to my mind at times when decisions had to be made. And in the aspect of leading my soldiers, I felt the Lord very close to me. But inside, I struggled because I was not able to bring my grief to the forefront and deal with it. I began to isolate myself from my friends and my family. I took the old adage, never let them see you sweat, to the maximum. And I plowed myself into serving my men and leaving no time to think of my own pain, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I would suggest to you that when someone has a loss like this, sooner or later, they have to come to the point where they confront and deal with the damage that's occurred. Following my return from my deployment, I was sent to Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, to go to the Army War College as a resident student. And what should have been an amazing time of my life rapidly became the worst year of my life, because for the first time in a long, long time, I had time on my hands to think and to self-evaluate. And I began to open up to my wife and share my feelings to her. And toward that end of the year, I began to, for the first time in quite some time, feel hope again. And hope is really the bottom line. It's what we all need. It's what you dispense in spades, I hope, as chaplains, is hope. For a warrior, as you know, there is nothing more painful than admitting that you feel weak And those that you serve, our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, our Border Patrol agents, whoever else you serve in these helping professions, they don't want to admit that they've got a weakness or that they feel pain. It's the ultimate low for them. But admitting that you need help is the first step in receiving that healing process. When tragedy strikes, we often ask a lot of why questions. And so I ran through a few of the why questions that came to our family. Why our son? Why our family? Why us? Why couldn't we have saved him? Why didn't God save him? Was it our fault? Through personal tragedy, I've learned that instead of why questions, maybe we ought to ask what questions instead. Some of those were, what can I learn from this terrible pain? What can I do to bless and strengthen my family through this difficulty? What can I do to deepen my testimony of the atonement? And I think most importantly, what can I do to bless others as a result of my tragedy? You know, we are the sum total of our life experiences, and we are able to serve much better because of the experiences that we have had. And so in our lives, what my wife and I decided shortly after our son's death was to start a suicide support group. We did that about 13 years ago. And that group has been active ever since. We meet monthly. And we have, on a bad day, we have 15 people. On a good day, we have 70. And they still come. And they come because they need comfort and they need hope due to the terrible tragedy that they faced. In the process of serving others, we've been healed ourselves. And I think that's really the true measure of what service is all about. We serve, and we are blessed in the process. It's been said that sympathy is saying, I'm sorry for your pain, but empathy is saying, I'm with you in your pain. And I think that's what chaplains do better than anybody. Be with us in our pain. I love this quote, empathy is a strange and powerful thing. There is no script. There is no right way or wrong way to do it. It's simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting and communicating that incredibly healing message of, you're not alone. In the book of Mosiah, wonderful chapter where Alma, former priest of King Noah, is preaching the gospel and baptizing. He says that if we desire to become God's people, we must be willing to bear one another's burdens, that they may be light. And in verse 9, he says, yea, and be willing to mourn with those that mourn, yea, and comfort those who stand in need of comfort. Above all, we must share love and hope with those who have suffered at the hands of suicide. We know chaplains comfort the living. Some years ago, at a senior leader conference, I met a Catholic priest and chaplain who was personally on scene at the Oklahoma City bombing. And he tells the story of those initial moments. For those of you that have been involved in rescue and recovery operations, one of the other jobs that my battalion had in Iraq was to respond to every homicide bombing that occurred. And in those initial moments, I remember very poignantly the UN bombing, and having been there just a few weeks earlier, trying to convince the chief of mission that they needed security around that embassy, and his response was, the Iraqis hate you, not us. We're safe. Leave us alone. And so we left. And a couple of weeks later, that place, as you know, was destroyed. Much death. But in the initial moments, you're looking for survivors frantically, quickly, because you know the time is limited. And then eventually it becomes recovery, and you're just finding remains. But the same thing was happening in Oklahoma City, and dogs were brought in, and these dogs were used very effectively to find survivors. But then a strange thing happened. As the recovery operation ensued, the dogs began to quit working. They lay down. They would not continue to do what they were trained to do. Veterinarians were brought in. They were concerned. They thought the dogs were ill. Maybe they'd gotten some bad food. They didn't know why the dogs wouldn't search. Then a smart veterinarian figured it out. The dogs were trained to find survivors, and they lost hope because they weren't finding any more survivors. And so they began mingling bodies of survivors, actual survivors, in the rubble. And as the dogs began to find survivors again, they began to work. The point is that dogs need hope too, just like human beings. And if I could dispense anything to you, it would be, as a chaplain, hold the space, withhold judgment, exude love, and dispense hope. Those are the most important things that you can do for someone who is struggling. Sometimes we lose hope because the answers don't come in the way that we expect them, in the time we expect them to come to us. I'll tell another story. We deployed early on in the Iraq conflict. We had a 16-month deployment, and by the time my battalion was released to return down to Kuwait and go home, we were at 76% strength due to injuries and wounds. We hit the wash rack, got ready to ship our equipment back, and then the call came from my division commander at the time, Major General Martin Dempsey. Some of you may have heard of that man. He said, "I need you back. I need you back fast." And so we began making preparations. It was going to take us about a week to refit and get back up there. There was an uprising in Karbala. And I remember going back to my tent after I received that order and getting on my knees. And I was angry because we'd indeed had the ministering of angels. And I knew that if I took those men back north, that I was going to lose a few of them. And so I pleaded with God. In fact, I told God exactly what he needed to do. Anybody experienced that before? I actually told God what his plan was for me and my men. And I got to say, I was angry. And I prayed. They were angry prayers, I'm not proud to say. And this went on for that entire week as we got ready to move back to the north. And then I'll never forget that last morning before we were supposed to begin the movement. Before I left my tent, I was on my knees praying, and this unbelievable calm came over me. And I knew that God was with us and that we would be all right, that we could do this, that if it was his will, everything would be fine. And I got up and walked out of that tent and went into my command post and received another call from Martin Dempsey, and he said, "It's time for you to go home." He was concerned about the strength of my unit and the fact that there were other units sitting idle in the AOR. And for those of you that were there, you know what I'm talking about. There were a lot of units there. So ultimately, what I learned from that little experience is that more than anything, those of us that try to control every aspect of our lives cannot. And we cannot try to control everything, but we must lay it at the feet of our Savior. We must lay the challenges that we face at the feet of Christ and have faith that the doors that open are the doors that Heavenly Father wants to have open. And the doors that are closed are doors that should not be kicked in. This is probably the greatest struggle for all of us in life. As I've reflected, my son was excellent in everything he did. He was a handsome young man. He was capable. He would have made a real impact in this world. And I've often wondered, why, Heavenly Father, is he not here? Why did this happen? Ultimately, I don't know the answer. That prayer is unanswered yet. And I love this wonderful song because it demonstrates the fact that we have to simply have faith and put one foot in front of the other every day and strive to serve others in spite of our own hurts and our own pains. Above all, we have to dispense hope and love as the Savior would, because nothing will heal those who have pain and sorrow faster. It's my testimony. And I don't say this in a wishy-washy way. I don't believe. I don't hope. I know that God lives. There's no question in my mind. Another experience that I had downrange with my best friend, a battalion commander of the 101st Airborne, was ambushed and killed. And my battalion received the coordinate search mission to go down to that area in Karbala. And I remember going into my hooch and falling on my knees away from where anybody could see me, and I was literally on my hands and knees and trying to make some sense out of what had just happened to my dear friend who had two little boys and a beautiful wife. And I couldn't make any sense out of it, but what God did for me was the veil was made so thin at that moment that I literally felt I could have walked through it. And I felt my ancestors with such tremendous power that I can't even describe to you in words how that felt. But they were there. They are there. And they're aware of you and of me and of our struggles and our challenges. And I was ministered to in a way that I've never felt before. And I could no more deny God than I could quit serving his children because of the love that I have for him. I love you so much, all of you. And I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to wear this uniform and to serve. I'm thankful for each one of you who gets up every morning and does something worthwhile with your lives. I know that there's a lot of compassion stress. I would tell you in closing, chaplains, you must take care of your own spiritual health. Take time to read, to meditate, to pray. As Elder Ballard has counseled us, take time to do that daily interview where you talk to yourself about what your goals are and what your hopes and dreams are. And then really talk about how you're doing to yourself and reset those goals that you set in your life so that you can move forward in a positive way and that you can bless lives. It's the only way that you can stay healthy as you seek to serve. And I leave this with you in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. And Frank said I had a minute for questions, but maybe I don't. Okay, I've got 10 minutes for some quick questions if anybody has any. And if not, I'll just go sit down and shut up. I'm good at that too. Anybody out there? Yes, sir. Chaplain, U.S. Navy. Oh, Coast Guard. Okay. A coastie.
Leave it to the time I want to ask a question. I got to get up on the stage. Sir, my question is, did you have chaplain support? Did you feel there's a barrier because of your rank to the chaplains reaching out to you, or were your chaplains bold enough and compassionate enough to try and serve you?
Wonderful question, thank you. Yeah, it was strange. Now remember, this was 13 years ago. This was before the church much had been spoken about suicide. You could not find much in doctrine about it. But on one of my darkest days, I remember as I was striving to function and to do my job in a pleasing manner to God and to those I served, it was a particularly dark day. And a very dear friend who was a chaplain, he told me something that is pretty special to me. He said, remember, you hold the priesthood of God. Live up to that. You're unique in that you hold this priesthood, and remember it. Remember what it is, first and foremost. It's God's power given to man to serve, really, to serve and to bless. That helped me so much. That chaplain saved my life that day. And so, yes, I had great chaplain support, and I have so many friends that are chaplains that I have respect for, and so it was helpful. But I will say, what Satan seeks to do, and I would just encourage you to pay attention to this. When someone loses somebody in this very violent way, even if they're very active in a particular church and they worship on a regular basis, the tendency will be to run the other direction. You don't even want to get out of bed some days. You don't want to face the world. You have no idea how hard it was to continue to serve and to continue to go and function. And this is the challenge that they all face, is just finding meaning to get out of bed in the morning. And so you can help them with that, and this chaplain helped me in that way. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh.
Steve Lineback, sir. Your story is compelling. enriches our life. And I'm wondering if you've had a bit opportunity to share your story with other commanders and or have heard some of their stories.
Yeah, thanks. I absolutely have. I'm very open about it. I think that it's important. It's important to talk about and to share simply because it might help somebody else. It doesn't give me pleasure. I don't enjoy this, and I don't like rehashing it because it's so painful personally. But if it can help others, then I do. And so, yes, I have talked to my commanders about it. I've talked about the weaknesses that I've felt and the need I've had for spiritual and emotional uplift and strength. And really, I think one of the great things the military is doing right now is putting a lot of money into resiliency programs for our service members and trying to break down the stigmas of actually needing to go talk to someone, needing help. A soldier, airman, sailor, Marine will come and talk to a chaplain a lot sooner than they'll come and talk to their commander. It's my desire that commanders can have enough compassion to where soldiers will feel comfortable coming and talking about these kinds of issues. Thanks, Steve. Sir.
They turn on? All right. Sir, you mentioned some of the difficult things that people said to you that weren't helpful and some of your difficult journey on deployment. You said later that you came to a place where you had to deal with it. I was just wondering about that experience of dealing with it.
Yeah. Thank you. I was raised by a very strong man. He was a Korean War veteran, a combat medic. My two uncles were also World War II and Korean War veterans. They were my heroes growing up. They were the men that I looked to. They were strong men. They were family men. They always took care of their families. I always felt safe around my dad, my uncles. And I kind of wanted to model my life like them. And so for me, to admit weakness was very difficult. I had a lot of pride about being a man and doing the things that men are expected to do. We all have stereotypes, right, roles that we fill. And so for me, what it came down to was my wife finally had to come to me and say, you need to go get some help. Because right after the event, my wife and children went into counseling, as they should have, but I didn't have the opportunity to do that. And nor could I show weakness. Heavenly Father told me as I went out to that deployment that my soldiers would look into my eyes to see how they should feel. And I wasn't going to let them see anything but strength. And so on the day that my wife came to me, it was pretty devastating to me to have her tell me that she could not live with me in the way that I had come to. Because I had armored up to the point that I wasn't speaking to her. I didn't share. And she could feel my pain. And so that's what got me on the road to dealing with my issues. And really admitting your weakness is the first step to recovery, right? But many of our warriors have a very difficult time doing that. And you brethren who serve out there in the trenches, and we have some sister chaplains here too, you know what that's all about. And you got to break down those barriers. I'm grateful that they were broken down for me. Yes, sir.
Sir, Jonathan Harrop with the Arizona Guard. One of the experiences that I've had with people on the balance, I guess I've tried to find, is between talking with them when they need to talk and then giving them space when they need the space and trying to discern between the two. Could you help speak to that piece?
Sure. Yeah, we abhor a vacuum, right? And so we got to fill it. And we talk too much. I think it's okay for silence. A lot of feelings are sent back and forth in silence. And so hold space. That's what you've got to do as a chaplain. Hold the space, as that quote talked about. Hold the space. It's okay to be silent. Really, your job is to listen more than anything. These people need to get their feelings out. They need to know that they're not alone, above all. And you can do all of that without saying a word. And then, if you do what Elder Ballard told us to do, and you may not have heard this talk, I happen to serve in a YSA state currently, and in it he talked about the fact that whenever he encounters someone who has a testimony problem or who is losing their faith, the first question he asks them is, how's that scripture study going? I haven't been reading. How's your prayer? Oh, I haven't been praying. And then he talked about that personal interview. And so I would tell you that if you will do those things in your personal life, you've got to take the time for that. If you'll do your personal study, you'll pray, you'll do that self-interview daily, that when the moment comes, the Spirit will be with you, and you will know what you need to say. But sometimes less is better. Less is more. Thanks.
Sir, First Lieutenant Schlecht, I wanted to ask you a question about your own methods of self-care. What role did your own self-care play in your healing process? And what are your own personal philosophies of not only spiritual self-care, but also recreational, physical, any other methods of self-care that might contribute to your quality of life?
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm a Stoic at heart. Stoicism, and I don't believe it in its entirety because it's not in line with the doctrine of the church that I love. However, there are some lessons to learn there. And what Stoicism teaches is that you are responsible for the content of your character, you and nobody else. And so you've got to want to get well, and you've got to be well balanced. So leaders have to take time every day to read, to study, to pray, to exercise, and to meditate. Meditation is a powerful tool, and I believe in it wholeheartedly. If you use it, I think it helps you to receive insights, and really that's where the answers to your prayers come anyway. I don't know how you are, but I seldom get bolts of lightning while I'm on my knees, but the answers do come as I'm meditating on what I read, meditating about what I thought and what my feelings and questions are. That's where the answers come. So you've got to be well balanced, and if you don't do that, you're going to be imbalanced, and obviously that isn't a good thing. And you can't minister to someone else if you're not on higher ground. So I just strive to be on higher ground, and I think that's what we all have to do.
Sir, I also have lost someone I love to suicide, and I have a question in regards to helping those that you love who do not hold the faith you have. How can we reach out to them in a way that is comforting?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I think it gets centered around love and hope. You have to dispense hope. And look, at a time like this, when someone suffered a loss like this, they're probably at the lowest point in their life. The good news is they're probably the most humble they've ever been. And the good news is they might even be open to a spiritual message that they may not have been before. They might be open to that thought and that idea that life is eternal, it doesn't end here. And so, you know, without being too brash, I try to share that concept or thought with someone who I know does not have any faith, but who is at a time when maybe that seed can be planted. So I think that's what we do. Love, we just love them unconditionally, dispense hope. And if you feel so inclined by the Spirit, you share this idea of eternal life. I cannot tell you the strength that the words of Amulek had for me. It was a scripture we used in the mission field where he says, the spirit and the body shall be united again. His perfect form, both limb and joint, shall be restored to its proper frame. And as we now are at this time, and we shall be brought to meet God. That's terribly paraphrased, but I got to tell you, that gave me tremendous strength. And these concepts will bless their lives. You just need to follow the Spirit as to how much you share and when you do it. Okay. I bet I'm out of time. All right. One more. All right. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. That prevention class you established, or the not the prevention, but the survivor class, can you walk through briefly your structure and how you came to establish that and how it's going so far?
Yeah. Again, this is not done by healthcare professionals. It's done by a couple of people who aren't classically trained, my wife and I. But what it is simply just a safe place where survivors can come. We sit in a circle and we pass around the ball. And when you have the ball, you speak. And some people can't, they just pass the ball around because they can't speak. That's usually me. But the good news is that when you have that ball, no one interrupts you. You're able to talk just about how you are feeling. And we have families there who have had 3 children take their lives. Just think about that. Think about the crushing burden that is on a couple of parents who feel like total failures. And by being able to feel first and foremost that they're not alone, there are others in the situation who are suffering in like manner, and to get some hope that maybe there's something beyond where they are at that moment, because really life stops for you at that moment. And so more than anything, it's an opportunity to share and feel hope. And it's just a lay setting where folks who aren't classically trained can just express their feelings. Okay, thank you, everybody.